Don't make a sound. Don't say a word. The whisper tore into the silence with the urgency of thunder. Maya Carter burst into the room, her dark hands trembling as they pressed against the mouth of her employer. She was 26, black, thin from long hours of service, her uniform damp from the storm that had followed her inside. Her face was sharp with fear, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with her own safety and everything to do with his. Across from her, Richard Alcott, 61, white, billionaire industrialist, froze in disbelief. He was a man accustomed to controlling rooms with his signature alone. Tonight he sat alone in his oak-paneled study, the weight of his empire stacked before him in contracts waiting for his pen. His hair was white at the temples, his features handsome but hardened by decades of power. And yet in that moment, with Maya's hands clamped across his mouth, he looked not powerful but helpless, reduced to panic. His pen clattered onto the desk, his papers scattered in a frantic arc. He flailed against her grip, convinced for a second that this was an assault, that the servant he had employed had suddenly turned predator. Maya's whisper broke again, trembling but urgent. Please, please don't speak, just listen. You must stay calm. Lightning slashed the sky outside, illuminating the room in a violent flash. The carved bookshelves, the heavy drapes, the gilt-framed oil paintings of Alcott ancestors, all of it flickered as though the house itself had been accused. Richard's eyes were wide with fury and fear, his muffled protest pressed against her palm. He twisted in his chair, trying to wrench himself free. Maya's knees buckled under his resistance, but her grip held, not with strength, but with desperation. "Trust me for just a moment," she begged, her voice breaking. "You cannot speak right now. If you do, it will be too late." Her words were shards of glass, trembling in the air, and then the door exploded open. Claudia Alcott stormed in, a woman of 58, white, dressed in silk the color of blood. She was Richard's wife, co-owner of the mansion in name, mistress of it in spirit. Her beauty was elegant but cold, lips painted with cruelty, eyes lined with suspicion. She had built her life on appearances, and in this instant the appearance before her was damning. "Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us." She froze at the threshold, and then the scream came. High-pitched, guttural, horrified. "What is happening here?" The sound sliced through the house, ricocheting down hallways, rattling chandeliers. For a moment, time itself seemed to hold its breath. Richard lurched upward, the chair toppling behind him. His face, flushed with rage, snapped toward his wife. Maya stumbled back a step, her hands still hovering as if to protect him from words as much as from harm. But the tableau was unmistakable. The servant girl, disheveled, pressing her hands across the mouth of a man worth billions. The master's papers spilled across the floor like evidence. His wife at the door, shrieking. It looked like an attack. It looked like betrayal. And the storm outside only deepened the illusion. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rolled through the walls. The mansion itself seemed to echo Claudia's cry, a house holding its secrets too long, now suddenly breaking. Richard staggered back, chest heaving, pointing at Maya with a finger that shook with fury. His mind could not reconcile what he had seen. The fear of a moment ago had curdled into anger, and anger came easier. Maya, chest heaving, eyes brimming, tried to speak, but Claudia's voice drowned her. "You filthy wretch!" Claudia screamed, her voice cutting like broken glass. "How dare you lay a hand on him?" The words cracked open the silence. From somewhere down the corridor, footsteps echoed. The household was waking, drawn toward the noise. Maya tried again, her voice desperate, almost lost beneath the storm and the accusations. "I wasn't, please." But Claudia advanced, her fury feeding itself. "You thought you could harm him in his own study. You thought you could rise above your place, touch what you should never touch." Her hands trembled not with fear but with outrage, with the certainty of privilege wronged. Richard clutched at the edge of his desk, trying to steady his breath, torn between fury at Maya and confusion over her whispered plea. His heart pounded like a drum of war. He had almost believed her in that instant, almost. But his wife's scream had tipped the balance. The study, once a place of order and control, had turned into a stage for chaos. Papers littered the floor. The storm outside battered the windows. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the three figures in stark relief. The billionaire, trembling with rage, the wife ablaze with accusation, and the servant girl caught between truth and damnation, her voice strangled by fear and urgency. Maya's words still hung in the air. Don't say a word. Don't make a sound. But now, sound filled everything. Claudia's shrieks, Richard's furious protests, the storm's relentless pounding. And somewhere deeper in the mansion, servants stirred, whispers rose, the household began to move. The echo of Claudia's scream was already turning into a chorus. The moment had calcified, frozen in lightning. The servant who looked like an assailant, the master who looked like a victim, the wife who looked like a witness. The truth was hidden in Maya's trembling voice, in the plea she had tried to make before the world crashed in. But no one wanted truth in that moment. They wanted judgment, and judgment was already racing down the hall. The word ripped from Claudia Alcott's throat, sharp enough to cut through the storm outside. She stood at the center of the study, silk gown clinging in the heat of her rage, finger pointed like a dagger. This wretched creature dared to lay her hands on you. Richard Alcott's face flushed crimson. He had gathered himself now. The terror of Maya Carter's sudden intrusion hardened into fury. His voice thundered across the oak-paneled room. Who do you think you are? Maya staggered backward, her arms still raised in a half-defensive, half-pleading posture. Her breath trembled. The storm outside rattled the windows as if it too recoiled from the accusation. The study door burst wider as footsteps pounded the hallway. Servants poured in, maids in stiff uniforms, footmen in pressed jackets, a cook still holding a ladle dripping with broth. Their faces carried the same expression, curiosity curdling into contempt. Among them was Harold Briggs, head butler, 57, white, tall and lean, his jaw stiff with pride. He had served the Alcotts for 3 decades and prided himself on order. To him, order meant hierarchy, and hierarchy meant knowing one's place. His gaze landed on Maya with cold satisfaction, as if the scene before him confirmed every suspicion he had ever nurtured. She was on him, Claudia spat, her voice breaking into a sob that was more performance than pain, clutching at him like an animal. The servants gasped. A murmur rose, bitter and hot. And like all mobs, it needed no evidence. Ungrateful girl. Always thought she looked sly. Knew she'd bring trouble. Maya shook her head, her voice breaking through the chorus. No, I was trying to... Silence. Richard's roar drowned her protest. His finger jabbed toward her like a gavel. You've disgraced yourself. You've disgraced this house. Claudia's eyes gleamed with triumph, though her tears still glistened. She turned, her tone measured now, like a woman pronouncing sentence. Throwing her out would be too merciful, too quick. Let her feel what it means to betray this household. No contact with the outside, no freedom. She stays here, kept under watch, until we decide otherwise. A murmur of approval rippled through the gathered servants. Harold Briggs stepped forward, bowing slightly. As you wish, madam. Maya's breath caught. You can't. Claudia's hand cracked across her face, silencing her. The sound echoed like a pistol shot. Maya staggered, cheek burning, eyes stinging. From that night forward, the mansion became her prison. Days blurred into each other. Morning bells, heavy tasks, endless corridors patrolled by suspicion. Maya was given the hardest chores, lugging firewood in the rain, scrubbing marble floors until her hands bled, polishing silver that gleamed only for those who mocked her. The isolation was worse than the labor. Every letter she tried to write was intercepted. Every glance at the gates was shadowed by Harold Briggs, who ensured no word escaped beyond the estate's walls. The telephone lines were locked. The servants whispered about her as if she were a criminal awaiting trial, and Claudia ensured the whispers never ceased. Passing her in the hall, Claudia would lean close, perfume mingling with venom. You'll rot here, girl. Best forget whatever hope you thought you had. Richard rarely spoke to her. On the rare occasions their paths crossed, his gaze slid over her like glass. The trust that had once existed, the faint respect he had shown when hiring her, was buried under suspicion Claudia had planted. Yet Maya endured. At night, when the house fell silent, She would retreat to her small servant's quarters, no bigger than a closet, with its iron bed and a single cracked window. From under the mattress she would draw out a small wooden box. The box was her secret, the one thing no one could touch. She had wrapped it in an old shawl to hide it from casual eyes. Inside lay folded papers, notes, copies, fragments she had collected. Contracts she had glimpsed while dusting the study. Clauses she had scribbled in haste, odd signatures that didn't match. To others they would look meaningless. To Maya, with her keen memory and the education she had been forced to abandon, the papers told a story of fraud. The box was her shield, her evidence, her hope. Each time she touched it, she remembered who she was. Not just a servant, but once a law student, top of her class until poverty crushed her ambitions. She had taken the job in this mansion not to surrender her life, but to preserve it, to keep her family alive while waiting for another chance. The chance had come in the worst form, overhearing whispers, catching glances at papers that stank of deception. She had pieced together something rotten, but the night she had tried to warn Richard, her panic had betrayed her. Now the box was all that stood between her and despair. The days grew heavier. Claudia's cruelty sharpened. "Fetch my jewels," she would command. And when Maya returned breathless, Claudia would sneer. Too slow. Tasks doubled. Punishments grew harsher. At meals, Maya ate scraps after the others had finished, the taste of contempt more bitter than the stale bread. The other servants followed their mistress's lead. Evelyn Harris, a young maid with bright curls and a tongue quick as a whip, delighted in mocking her. "Careful, Maya," she would sing in the kitchen. "Don't strangle anyone with your dishcloth." Laughter followed, and Maya endured it in silence. Yet her eyes never lost their fire. Whenever she passed Richard Alcott in the hall, she would lift her gaze, steady, unwavering. He tried to ignore it, but sometimes the weight of her stare slowed his steps. Her eyes said what her lips could not. "There is something you need to know, something that could save you." Richard would look away, unsettled. Claudia noticed. She always noticed, and each time she drew her husband closer with a touch to his arm, a whisper in his ear, shielding him from the servant girl's gaze. One evening, thunder rolled again over the estate. Maya was kneeling in the corridor, scrubbing the floor until her arms trembled. Richard passed, a sheaf of documents under his arm. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single glance. His uncertainty, her resolve. She opened her mouth to speak, but Harold Briggs cleared his throat behind her, the sound heavy with warning. Richard quickened his pace, vanishing around the corner. Maya lowered her head, gripping the brush so tightly her knuckles whitened. The water in the bucket rippled with her restrained fury. She could not speak. She could not escape. But she could endure, and she could wait. Because the truth sat hidden in her wooden box, and every day she carried its weight like a secret flame. Maya Carter lived like a prisoner in the mansion of her employer, cut off, humiliated, worked to the bone. Yet she never surrendered. Behind the locked doors, beneath the silence, she kept her secret close, and with it, a determination that one day, when the moment came, she would speak and the truth would burn through every lie surrounding her. Her eyes never wavered. Each time they found Richard Alcott, they carried the same silent vow. "I have something you must hear, and one day, you will hear it." It began with footsteps too quiet for most ears to catch. But Claudia Alcott had learned long ago how to move like suspicion itself, soft, deliberate, almost soundless. On that afternoon, when storm clouds pressed low but the house itself was still, she drifted down the servant's wing. Her silk heels made no echo on the carpet. She paused outside Maya Carter's small room, her hand tightening on the brass knob. Claudia Alcott was not accustomed to uncertainty. She had run her marriage like she ran her house, with sharp eyes and sharper rules. And yet a thought had grown in her mind like rot behind the walls, that the servant girl hiding behind lowered lashes might be holding something more dangerous than defiance. She pushed the door open. The room was modest, almost bare. A narrow iron bed, a chair, a cracked window where rain streaks lingered from the night before. But Claudia's gaze was sharp. She went straight to the nightstand, yanked the drawer, then dropped to her knees at the side of the bed. With hands fueled by fury, She tore at the mattress until her nails scraped wood. And then she saw it. A box. Small, wooden, wrapped in a shawl. Claudia's lips curved. "So this is your secret." She pulled the box out and set it on the bed. Her fingers trembled, not from fear but from greed. The door burst open. Maya Carter stood there, soaked from rain, breathless from the run back. Her uniform clung to her frame, and in her eyes burned a fire that had never been extinguished. When she saw the box in Claudia's hands, her voice cracked with desperation. "Put that down!" Claudia straightened, clutching the box to her chest like stolen treasure. Her painted smile turned cruel. "So this is what you guard with your life." Maya lunged. The two women collided in the narrow room, bodies crashing against the bed frame. The box slid, nearly toppling to the floor, but Maya caught it in both hands. They struggled, breath ragged, hair torn from pins. Claudia hissed into Maya's ear, her words venom. "You don't know what you're meddling with." "I know enough," Maya shot back, her strength fueled by something deeper than fear. The box cracked open in the scuffle. Papers spilled, copies of contracts, notes scribbled in Maya's tight hand, signatures traced in ink. Claudia's eyes widened. "You little snake." The truth burst out. Words spat in rage. "You think you're clever? You think you can stop me? I had Richard sign every page, every clause. Soon the company, the estate, everything will be mine. And when it is, he'll be dead, and I'll be free with the man I choose, not this relic choking me with his wealth." Maya froze, breath shuddering. The words had left Claudia's mouth unbidden, but they were true. The puzzle she had pieced together in silence, in shadows, now screamed in her face. Claudia and her lover had plotted it all. Contracts disguised as business agreements, the plan to strip Richard Alcott of his empire, and finally the intent to kill him once his signature sealed his doom. Claudia's eyes blazed with hatred. "You know too much. That's why I kept you here. Why I clipped your wings. You think I wouldn't silence you when I'm done?" Maya's grip tightened on the box. "You may silence me, but you cannot erase the truth." Claudia lunged again, but Maya twisted, her elbow striking the alarm switch mounted by the bed. The button depressed with a heavy thud. The mansion exploded with sound. A siren blared, echoing down the marble corridors, rattling the crystal chandeliers. Servants shouted in confusion. Footsteps thundered toward the source. Richard Alcott himself stormed into the room, Harold Briggs and half the household at his back. His voice cracked with fury. "What in God's name is happening here?" The scene froze, Maya clutching the box to her chest, Claudia with her gown torn and face wild, papers strewn across the floor like the fragments of her scheme. And Claudia, in her frenzy, forgot herself. She screamed. "She found everything. She knows the contracts. She knows the plan." Gasps filled the room. Richard staggered, as though struck. "The plan?" His voice was hoarse. Maya stepped forward, eyes locked on him. Her voice was low but steady, a voice she had trained in law lectures before poverty stole her future. "She forged contracts. She and her lover mean to take everything you own, and once it is done, she means to kill you." Claudia's face drained of color, but pride drove her mouth. "Lies," she spat. "She's twisting," but the words caught in her throat. Because the servants had heard too much, and Richard's eyes had already shifted. They no longer burned at Maya. They burned at the woman he had called wife. Maya's voice trembled only once. "I tried to warn you that night. When I ran into your study, when I held your mouth closed, I wasn't attacking you. I was stopping you from shouting. I had overheard her plotting your death. I panicked. I needed you to hear me first, before the house, before her. That is all." The siren still screamed, rattling the walls. Outside, thunder rolled again, as though the storm itself wanted witness. Claudia backed against the wall, words tumbling out, desperate. "She's lying. She's nothing but a servant." But the papers lay at their feet. Her own words hung in the air, and truth had a way of stripping silk bare. The servants stared, their whispers growing. Harold Briggs bent down, picked up a contract page and squinted at the mismatched signatures. His lips pressed into a grim line. "She's telling the truth, sir. Richard Alcott closed his eyes. For a heartbeat, he looked every one of his 61 years. Then he opened them again, and when he did, they were cold. Claudia reached for him, hands trembling. "Richard, please." But he stepped back. The siren wailed, and in that sound was judgment. Claudia Alcott, mistress of the house, stood exposed. No velvet gown, no diamond ring, no scream could cover the truth now. She had confessed in her own fury, and in front of all who mattered. Her voice broke into stammers, denials already rotting. The crowd pressed closer, the servants whispering louder, the weight of evidence undeniable. And in the center stood Maya Carter, her chest heaving, her box clutched tight, her eyes fixed not on triumph but on the man whose life she had saved, desperate still to make him understand. Richard Alcott stood in the center of his wife's betrayal, his breath shallow, his mind refusing and then finally admitting the truth. The contracts at his feet, the servant's wide eyes, the broken words spilling from Claudia's painted mouth, it all fused into a single realization. He had been one signature away from ruin, one whispered plan away from death. The man who had commanded boardrooms, who had tamed industries, now trembled at the simplest of truths. He had nearly been destroyed by the woman he had once trusted most. "Enough," he whispered. The word dragged from a throat thick with disbelief. Then louder, steadier. "Enough!" His hand struck the wall phone, the one reserved for emergencies. The call to the police was short, clipped, a voice fighting to remain calm while the storm outside hurled itself against the mansion walls. Within minutes, flashing lights broke the darkness of the estate. Officers stormed the halls, their boots echoing judgment. Claudia Alcott, elegant in her ruin, was pulled from the house in handcuffs. Her lover Gregory Holt, 45, a corporate attorney whose charm had always hidden a predator's ambition, was arrested that same night, found waiting in a nearby hotel room with a suitcase full of forged documents. The press descended. Headlines blared across morning editions. Heiress plots, husband's murder for fortune. Cameras captured Claudia's face, contorted not with regret but with fury at having been caught. Her jewels glinted in the flashbulbs like shackles. For Richard, humiliation mingled with relief. He had been moments from annihilation, and the person who had stopped it was not the loyal butler, nor his lawyers, nor the circle of friends he had trusted for decades. It was Maya Carter, the young black servant girl his household had mocked, the one he himself had nearly cast out in anger. The days after the arrest brought a strange stillness. The mansion, once filled with whispers against Maya, now seemed to bow in her direction. Servants who had sneered now lowered their eyes when she passed. Harold Briggs, stiff and formal, mumbled the closest thing he had to an apology. But Richard Alcott sought her out directly. They stood in the study where it had all begun. The oak desk, still scarred by the night of chaos. Richard's voice was quieter now, the voice of a man chastened by revelation. "Why?" he asked, the question heavy. "Why would you risk everything for me? You owed me nothing." Maya's hands tightened around the shawl she held, the one she used to wrap the box. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "Because my conscience would not let me stay silent, and because you were the first to give me honest work. Not charity, not pity, a real job. With it I could feed my family. That mattered more than you will ever know." Richard's chest constricted. A memory broke through, vivid as lightning. Years earlier, he saw her again, younger, standing at the gates of the estate with rain dripping from her hair. She had clutched a folder of credentials to her chest, her voice shaking as she stood before a line of applicants. "Please," she had whispered back then, eyes bright with desperate hope, "give me one chance. I need a job that is decent, and I will use everything I know to do it well." He had barely looked at her. He remembered dismissing the folder, uninterested in the details. Something in her gaze had caught him, though, an intensity, an honesty. He had hired her almost absent-mindedly, the only one chosen from a dozen. He hadn't thought of it again, until now. And here she stood, after storms and shackles, after humiliation and peril, her eyes still carrying that same light. Only now it burned stronger, tempered by fire. Richard's voice broke. "I never saw you clearly. Not then. Not until now." Maya's gaze softened, though her back remained straight. News of her courage spread beyond the estate. Reporters told her story. The servant girl who had uncovered fraud, who had risked her life to protect her employer. Universities reached out. Advocacy groups offered support. And soon, the opportunity she had been forced to abandon came alive again. A scholarship to return to her studies in law. For Maya, it was not a prize but a restoration, a road back to the dream she had carried even in silence. Richard watched her pack her few belongings. The wooden box still wrapped carefully in its shawl. He felt something he had not felt in years. Respect stripped of condescension. She was no longer a servant in his eyes. She was the reason he still had a life, a fortune, a name untarnished. On her last evening in the mansion, he stopped her in the foyer. "You've changed the way I see everything," he said simply. "I will never look at you, or anyone like you, the same way again." Maya smiled faintly. "Sometimes justice doesn't come from lawyers or judges," she said. "Sometimes it comes from the courage of the one least expected." Claudia Alcott sat in a prison cell, her silks replaced by gray, her diamonds by steel. Gregory Holt's law license was revoked, his name synonymous with scandal. The empire they had conspired to steal crumbled before it was ever theirs. Richard Alcott, chastened but alive, rebuilt his life with a new clarity. The newspapers praised his fortune, but he knew better. His survival had not come from wealth, but from the conscience of the woman he had nearly dismissed. And Maya Carter walked onto a campus once denied to her, books in her arms, head high. She was no longer the servant hidden in the shadows of a mansion. She was a student of law again, a symbol of resilience. Her eyes still carried the same light, steady, honest, unbreakable. Some legends rise from racetracks, some from boardrooms. Others rise quietly, from the corner of a servant's room, when one voice refuses to be silenced. Some betrayals strike from where we least expect, and some salvations come from voices we choose not to hear. Richard Alcott nearly lost his life, his fortune and his legacy, not to competitors on Wall Street but to the woman sharing his table. Yet it was Maya Carter, the servant everyone mocked, who carried the courage to act when silence would have been safer. She endured humiliation, isolation, and cruelty, yet held fast to her conscience. That conscience saved a man, exposed corruption, and restored her own stolen future. This story reminds us that justice does not always wear a robe or carry a gavel. Sometimes it looks like a young woman in a servant's uniform, clutching a wooden box and refusing to surrender to fear. True power lies not in wealth, but in the moral resolve of those the world tries hardest to overlook.